gender equality and diversity is explicitly covered gender, power dynamics, consent and domestic sexual and gender-based violence, both online and offline, within the revised relationship and sexuality curriculum. It's something that I've been raising with Norman Foley for 2 years exactly now, and I'd really like your perspective as we move into that body of work.
Do you want to go first to the Men's Development Network maybe on this?
First, I think from our perspective, really, I would certainly think that there needs to be a programme. We talk about the 3 R's in our education system: reading, writing, written. There needs to be a 4th R in terms of which looks at the holistic nature of engaging with young people in an age-appropriate way from Montessori right through into 3rd level, and that it needs to be a continuous run. And that what it does is it's age-appropriate, and it's addressing all of the areas around healthy relationships, consent, gender equality, gender-based violence, that it's done in a particular programme that runs its way through the organisation. The other thing that I personally think that needs to happen with it is that also it needs to be graded in some way. And I don't say that on the basis that people learn this thing, but I think it's the one way in which the schools, the teachers, will see a need for them. They actually know what the benchmark in terms of making sure that they do these programmes, because there are a lot of programmes go into schools. And they're not part of the integrated or the full core curriculum. And what that does is then they don't know what it is around success for it, and they also don't put the time and effort into it, knowing that when the inspectorate comes along, KIGRA comes along, they don't see, oh, I don't have to worry about what is the issue in terms of the healthy relationship or the issue of consent, or even the concept of even climate and gender, and all those type of things need to be incorporated in the CSPE model, and it needs to be broadened to that extent. But I think the critical thing, there needs to be a continuity that runs from the very early stages right through. And part of that also, we were certainly saying, is that using a particular model of engagement, whether it's with girls and boys, that it is about a non-judgmental approach to it. It is about saying, this is something, we're not trying to fix you here, we're inviting you into a conversation around what you need to do and how you need to bring it home into the family. And I think it's, my biggest problem with schools sometimes is that they are overrun with lots of different programs that they have to go into them. And it's very, very difficult to get time and space to do stuff. So I think really we need to have a 4th element to our core curriculum.
So instead of it being a day here and a day there, that it's an integrated model right throughout, week on week, all the way through. That's my view also.
Listen, I remember one of the most great examples I've had of using kind of different approaches. I remember doing geography through music once.
Okay.
So therefore I'm saying, well, there's no reason why you can't have a gender equality issue when you're doing maths. You integrate it and embed it in the full system, and that's the way, rather than saying, okay, we're going to go off now and do gender and gender equality stuff, we're going to go off and do consent stuff. No, you talk about consent within the day-to-day operations of the school.
Well, the thing is, they're already doing that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you're not allowed to hit another child in the school. Do you know what I mean? For reasons already. Although when we finish, I still want to hear more about geography and music afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Could I ask perhaps Akidwa and then Mary to just respond on Jennifer's questions?
Maybe not.
Thanks very much. And I think Sean just triggered my memory there of the chemistry class where osmosis was described with a party of boys on one side, girls on one side. So absolutely a lot can be achieved in that way. And I think in terms of education, we have to look at all the stakeholders. We have the children, we have the providers, that's the school, we have the home environment, then the parents who support outside of the school environment as well. So every area has to be looked at in terms of making sure, again, I stress inclusion within our educators, because it will also help with the continuity of learning and making sure that every aspect is integrated in every subject, which is indeed possible, as Sean started to highlight there as well. So
I think it's important that what we need to make sure is that every child gets a consistent education, and that it's not dependent only on the home situation either. That it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just only add that, when we talk about the curriculum, because you did mention about the curriculum there, that, and Sean has talked about the integrated, it needs to be integrated and inclusive, because, the curriculum that we have now does not reflect the diversity of people in Ireland today. It also has to go deeper and look at the grounds of discrimination, for example, because, you are in school with the children who have one parent, and other children, would look at it maybe different. They come from different background as well, ethnic and religious. So this curriculum needs to be holistic, the way you look at it. So it doesn't only have to be integrated, but also very inclusive, starting from primary level all the way up.
I agree with you. And, it's important to acknowledge that there are lots of teachers and lots of schools that are way ahead of what the conversation even that we're having here, and they're already doing that. But again, it's about making sure that it's a consistent every child experience, and that's where the curriculum review is so important.
Absolutely.
Mary?
Another thorny question, Jennifer, the issue of education. And I come back to sex, gender and sexuality. How is sex, gender and sexuality handled in schools, full stop? Because core to that whole dynamic is the issue of violence and control and intimacy and what that's all about. When we talk about consent, who wouldn't support that? On the other hand, one of the more dispiriting things I heard within, I think, a short period of this issue being raised, you already had young men asking young women to sign a consent on the phone to say that they had agreed to sex. So consent is completely meaningless in my mind without context and the issue of choice. Whose choice? What are you choosing? Whose desire is at play here? And famously women's desire is always rather submerged.
Mary, doesn't that get to a point where you're having a conversation about, you can't talk about what you're not consenting to without knowing what's, what's on the table, essentially. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's really about talking about healthy relationships. We keep teaching this as how not to get pregnant, how not to get a sexually transmitted disease, how not, with no context for what might be.
Can I just pick up on something that Colin said earlier, and he was talking about the private sphere, and that's greatly protected. But I would just raise in the chamber here that the separation of the world into private and public is itself a patriarchal construct. It is a place where men divide what may be counted and not counted as real, not least among them violence. In fact, I was having a very interesting conversation with a UK expert last week where she said, if we relook at the figures around violent crime, in fact, if you put the private sphere into that assessment and take the outliers out for the data nerds, that in actual fact that the most prevalent form of violence is of men against women. And we all kind of know that intuitively. Yeah. So the division of the private into and public is problematic. As I said in my opening statement, that has been redrawn under COVID, but also within the context of an educational context, that sort of, we can't talk about that here. We have to sit down and talk about all this. Yeah. And that's where we would go.
Colin Ryan is indicating he wants to come in if there's a moment for him.
Well, I was going
Please.
To say, I'm conscious it's near 12 and I do apologise because I have to step out to the Dáil chamber just after 12 as well, and we've kept you all 2.5 hours. But you might... Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Really
and then I'll go to Eileen.
So the first thing to say is I'll be really quick, and thank you, Deputy Carol McNeill, for the question. I think the first thing that I'd like to highlight is that education also needs to extend into the world of work. We know that patriarchal structures have, in time memoriam, put down women and girls. And that what I would call for as an action, which is in the national strategy as well, and we have lobbied the government in relation to this for the past 8 months, is ratification of ILO Convention number 190 and implementation of Recommendation 206. The second thing to highlight very quickly, if I may, is that I want to quote our friends and colleagues from the National Women's Council in their submission to the Department of Justice back in June of 21, where they noted that consent education, although, quote, although this is an important element of DSGBV education, it is but one aspect, albeit an important one. Consent as the primary framing or focus fails to capture the inherent complexities of DSGBV. And I'd like to echo that this needs to be a broader human rights and, as our colleagues at Akidwa mentioned, holistic approach to the issue. The final point that I would like to raise, I'd like to quote something as well very quickly, if I may, Madam Chair, is just to say in relation to, and I think that there are broader measures required here, often as the Istanbul Convention speaks of legislative measures also. Here's a quote for you. Measures ranging from education and awareness to codes of conduct and behaviour are essential to any comprehensive approach to tackling hate speech and hate crime. including by effective prevention. What I noted in reviewing the report on legislating for hate speech and hate crime from last year is that there are very clear nexuses in relation to the intersectionality vis-à-vis who experiences hate crime and speech in this country and who may experience or be at heightened risk of experiencing domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And what we need to do in relation to this is to ensure that the education programme that we have is age appropriate. It begins in primary level, but that it does, tackle. Absolutely. But thank you for the question.